One of the most important things is to know your value. So one of the things that we require everyone at Columbia Business School to do the first week they're there, we want them to pick their 5 core values and put them into a hierarchy where one is more important than others. And then we actually laminate a card for them.
You kind of need to codify it and turn to it and look at it. You're challenged essentially to be that human or not. Then you're like, well, I guess I better be this person. It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast social psychologist, professor at Columbia Business School, and the author of the brand new book, Inspire, The Universal Path for Leading Yourself and Others, Adam Galinsky. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
I enjoyed your book a great deal, but how does one go from having a PhD in social psychology from Princeton to teaching at Columbia Business School?
It's a great question. So part of it is just fate. So when I came out of Princeton psychology, I applied to 50 psychology departments and 3 business schools, and I got 0 offers for interviews in the psychology departments, and I got interviews in 2 of the 3 business schools. And so one of them was Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. Ended up doing a postdoc there, and then it was just a fantastic environment for me. One of the things I love about teaching in a business school is where theory meets practice, right? And so I love thinking about theory and the background and the psychological processes involved in a phenomenon, but I'm also intensely interested in the application of them and how they matter in the real world.
Well, I think being a business school professor sounds like an incredible gig. I'm friends with Scott Galloway, who's downtown at NYU Stern, and he's got a great gig. I think Jonathan Haidt might even technically be at the business school too somehow. Yeah. I mean, that guy is freaking changing the fabric of schools around the country by trying to get phones out, which I applaud. But so congratulations on having such a fun, awesome gig. And your research has led you to try and figure out what makes people good leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, my first love of teaching and research was negotiations. And so I did tons of research, especially about first offers, but also about how we can get the best outcomes, but also have the other side feel satisfied about those outcomes. But then in 2002, I was told I had to start teaching leadership. And so that wasn't really a primary area of focus at the time. And I started, teaching the core class at Kellogg and just really fell in love with the class, because one of the great things about teaching leadership is leadership kind of feeds into everything, like decision making, teams, culture, social networks, change. And so it became sort of a cornucopia, right, of intellectual interest. And then through the interactions of teaching leadership, that's how I started to become very interested in the topic of inspiring leaders.
Yeah, so just a few things for my background, some of which you may not know, but I did take a negotiations course when I was at Columbia's law school, and I liked it a lot. That was actually one of the most useful things I did. So just for everyone out there, if there's one thing I would let you know about negotiations, it's to try and anchor your first offer. That's
my research.
Nice. Well, nicely done, Adam.
Yes.
I think I've then been quoting you for years. So you want to make a first offer and anchor the negotiation, closer to where you want it to be. And so there's power behind that first offer. That was one of the principles I remember.
Yeah. And I was one of the primary people to do that research. And, it's funny when that paper came out in, there was so much. There was already books out there, never make the first offer, right? And the idea was when you make a first offer, or when the other side makes a first offer, you get information from that first offer. Of course, the problem is that information is incredibly biased in their direction. And so that you're oftentimes, not always, and so one of the great things is, I've been doing research on first offers and negotiations for over 20 years. And we just resubmitted a paper at one of our top journals that analyzed every study that had ever been done on first offers. I think there was something like 256 effects we have in this paper. And so we can document, is there a benefit for going first? What are some of the moderators? Should you go ambitiously first? All of these different
things. And what I remember is you should go first and you should be ambitious.
Absolutely, yes.
That's a reasonable summary. So people out there, go first, be ambitious.
I mean, there's a category of times when you don't want to be go first, and that's when the other side has far more information about the market. So some of you may have seen the show called Pawn Shops, and it's sort of interesting because they always ask the customer to make the first offer, and the reason why is they have
better information.
They have better information. So you might have a Matisse, and you're like, oh, I found this in my grandmother's attic, and they're like, what do you want for it? And they're like $500, and it's worth $10 million. You know?
You're like, done.
Yes, exactly. But I'll tell you two other just interesting things about first offers that are, I think, also can relate a little bit to the idea of inspiring leadership and how we lead people. So I did another study that I really, really love, which was he showed you also don't want to accept anyone's first offer, because if you say done, which you just did, their immediate reaction is...
They might be like, wait a minute, maybe I should invest for $10 million.
I made a mistake, right? Yeah. And so I actually did a bunch of studies where we showed that you're better off asking for a concession because A, you get a better outcome, and B, they're actually more satisfied with it because they don't feel any regret.
Who knew that your research has touched so many young people who've gone through law school or business school. So congrats on that.
Thanks.
Now, what would you say, and I can scaffold this a little bit, but when someone sees book on leadership, they might think, can you actually get better at something that to many might seem innate? And I will talk about my own experience with this a little bit. So some people ask me sometimes, it's like, hey, what are your leadership principles? And I tell them and I enjoyed your book a great deal, but like I have a few leadership principles. Number one, do try and create a vision for where you're going. That's number one. Number two, and this is not in your book, FYI. Number two is pay people. Which and one of the things, a lot of the examples in your book are in environments that aren't really economic in that way. So understood. I'm just letting you know what I've been trying to, and part of it is I've been running private companies and organizations, and one of the things I've learned is that you can get a certain distance on non-monetary things, but like eventually if you don't pay people appropriately, they'll be like, wait a minute, and then they'll, And then number three is act like you care about them. And ideally you do care about them, so it's not that much of an act. But I was like, if you do these three things, present a vision, compensate people fairly or even generously, and either care about them or act like you care about them, like you're going to be okay. And so you've done a lot more research. Mine was just based upon various experiences. But I have to say, at least we lined up on number one
and number three. Right, number three is caring about people.
Yeah, we lined up on 1 and 3,
and even 2 in a sense. If you think about like what does it mean to be an exemplar of desired behavior, it's really about having certain principles that you apply, right? In this case, your principle that you're applying is this idea of fairness or fair compensation. And I think you're exactly right that people, if you pay people fairly, right, they're going to be also very committed and dedicated to you. And I think that's a really important, point, exactly right. I think one of the things, so to get back to your earlier question, which is, the centuries old question, right? Are leaders born or made?
Yep.
And there's this idea of this, that there's certain qualities that people have, inherent qualities that make them more capable of being in leadership. And there is some truth to that, right? I think there's some people that have certain, even physiological reactivity that makes them more calm in certain situations, which can be very beneficial. But, the crux of the research in this book is really just asking tens of thousands of people around the world, on every continent, the same 2 questions, like, tell me about a leader that inspired you, and then asking them to tell me, what was it? What was the specific characteristics they had? And then asking them, tell me about a leader that infuriated you, just made your blood boil, right? And what was it about that person? And what I've been able to do is take these, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of examples, not hundreds of thousands, but tens of thousands of examples. And you start to realize that 3, I think, really important insights. The first insight is that the inspiring leader and the infuriating leader are basically mirror images of each other, right? So if we go back to vision, the inspiring leader, has this values-based, optimistic vision of the future, whereas the, big picture vision of the future, and the infuriating leader is a pessimistic, pedantic, right? Inspiring leader is, calm and courageous, whereas infuriating leader is anxious and cowardly. And, inspiring leader empowers people and elevates them versus diminishes them. So that's the first thing, is that they're on this universal continuum, and they kind of look at each other. But the second big insight is that that continuum is made up of these three universal factors. And you mentioned the three, and it's being visionary, which is how we see the world and communicate, how we exemplar, how we are in the world, and then mentor is how we interact with others or treat people in the world. And the reason why these are the three universal factors is because they each satisfy a fundamental human need. So we have a fundamental human need for meaning and purpose, and that's what vision comes in, or a fundamental need for protection, but also energy, and that's where exemplar comes in, and a fundamental need to belong, be included, but also feel respected by others, and that's where mentor comes in. And then the third sort of big insight is getting back to your original question, which is because there is a universal set of characteristics that exist in every country in the world, those can be studied, they can be learned, they can be developed, and they can be practiced, and so that we can become more inspiring over time.
One anecdote you told that I think a lot of people can relate to, and I have my own version of it. So you talk about this amplification effect where Daniel Kahneman, one of your mentors, thought your comment in class was not great and said so, and then you felt terrible about it for hours or days, yep. And then he said you were a great writer, and then it made you on cloud nine. You're like, I should do that for a living, because he was in such esteem. I'm going to tell you my version of it. I was the CEO of an education company, and then I called someone. And then I just wanted to get some information from them. So I asked them a few questions about something that had happened. And then at the end of it, they were like, well, that's a relief. And I was like, wait, what do you mean that's a relief? It's like, well, when the CEO calls you, you think you're, going to get fired or you're in trouble. And I was like, well, that's kind of nasty and negative, where I'm just calling you to figure something out. And you realize that people take everything you do with this enormous amount of weight. And you told the story about this CEO who smiled when he got a banana. And so then every room he was in from then on, had this whole set of bananas. He was like, what's with the bananas? And then they were like, it's because you love bananas. And he's like, what? Presumably he did at least like them. So you have this thing, and this now is, it's getting used in particular ways, but if you are the person in charge, everything you do carries a lot of extra weight, both positively and negatively.
Yeah. Yeah, a term I coined to sort of capture this is the leader amplification effect. And so that when we're a leader, there's more eyes on us, paying attention to us. So if you take that CEO, he goes to this first meeting as CEO, and the assistant is just watching him, and she sees him pick up a banana and smile, and she's like, okay, we have to have bananas at every meeting. And so one of the things you become aware of is that nothing is incidental, nothing is offhand, that you say, and because people are paying attention, all your signals get amplified. But I think the other most important thing is that all the reactions get intensified, right? And so, there's the reactions for, criticisms becomes humiliating criticism, silence becomes deafening, right? And even something ambiguous becomes portentous. So the phrase that I mentioned in the book, and you just mentioned, is, I need to talk to you, right? And so my experience was I was an assistant professor, and so I had more power than graduate students, but less power than, tenured faculty. And I saw a doctoral student one day at 9 a.m. and I just said, hey, Gail, come by my office at 3 p.m. I need to talk to you. She came in just like this person, crouched and worried. And I was like, what is going on? I just want to go over some research materials, And what's funny about this story is that, she slammed her fist on the table and said, never do that to me again. And I was like, do what? And she said, never tell me you want to meet with me without telling me why. She's like, for the last 6 hours, I got zero work done. Is Adam mad at me? Is someone else mad at me? Am I going to lose a resource? And at first I thought, Gail's neurotic, and she is a little neurotic. But the next day, the chair of my department said, oh, come by my office. And I freaked out. And
By the way, one countermeasure to this, if you're the CEO, which I started to do, is like, hey, I need to meet with you. Don't worry, it's about like nothing. Like you start throwing it in, like
absolutely,
where you just like frame it so the person's like, oh, okay, and then they don't stress.
Yeah, there was a president of a company on 3 continents, president of this company, and he would do this, and I'd worked with the company, and so some of the more senior members of the executive team went to him and said, could you just tell us why you want to meet with us? And he said, no, I don't have time. And so they negotiated. And he finally agreed when he sent a text, I need to talk to you, that he would put a colon and a closed parentheses, a smiley face when it wasn't scary. And I saw one of the executives 2 years later and she's like, oh my God, it's worked out so well. You get the smiley face. You're like, phew. And if you don't, you run as fast as you can, but you're exactly right, is that, part of it is the reason why the leader amplification effect, the solution, the first part of the solution is just awareness that it occurs, right? And part of it is in our own mind, we know when something's not scary. Like I knew I just needed to talk to Gail about her research materials, but she didn't know that, right? And
well, I'll tell you one thing I did in that company, which also I determined that people would not tell me stuff because I was a CEO, because they'd be afraid to get someone else in trouble, blah, 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 blah. So I actually knighted one of the instructors and said, you are now the instructor liaison and your only job is just to talk to instructors and get their info and input and feedback. And you have a budget, just buy them lunch or coffee or whatever and just traipse around and do that and just report to me, because they'll actually be honest with you, whereas they will not tell me things because they're just like, oh, everything I got was good news.
Absolutely. And, in the later chapter, I talk about something called the leader silencing effect, which is exactly what you're describing. So the leader amplification effect leads into the leader silencing effect. And so we can do lots of different ways to try to reduce it. But you're pointing out something that President Kennedy discovered in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is he couldn't even attend a meeting, right? And it would shut down the room because everyone would be worried about him watching them. And so he realized for early meetings when they were just throwing wild ideas on the wall, he just didn't even go to those meetings because they became very restricted in what they were willing to talk about.
Hello, YouTube. Please do hit that like and subscribe button. And don't forget, you can ask questions at mailbag@andrewyang.com. See you on the interwebs. Yeah, I mean, for me, my version of that became that, there'd be people getting together and having drinks or whatever, and that if I showed up, like people wouldn't want to drink, they wouldn't want to like say anything off color or whatever. And I realized, like, you know what? My being here sucks for them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's almost like I will now not show up because, like apparently I'm like an energy absorber. So a lot of people, again, I want to return to this a little bit. And so your message is that, look, these leadership habits and patterns can 100% be developed and improved on for a human who decides that they want to. So let's see if we can, and we can take them each in turn. Yeah. And by the way, I tend to agree that you can get better. I mean, in my view of the world, you can get better at most anything if you decide that's something that is important
better in
to
the
you.
Debates and
yeah, sure. I've been better. I wasn't great at a lot of things, and then you stick to it, and you can get better. So the first one is vision.
Yep.
And so a lot of people, by the way, and one thing I want to do too is mystify. It's like I am not someone who's going to run around being like, you should be a visionary. You should be more visionary, just because it seems sort of like lofty and a little self-congratulatory or whatnot. But what you're describing as visionary is actually something much more simple and straightforward.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, visionary, part of it is just having a clear goal, right? And so,
totally. So, like one of the examples that Adam used in the book is that a plane was having trouble, and then the pilot just said into the speaker system, "We are not going down. We're going to Philadelphia," which is like a vision. It's like we're landing the plane. I mean, it doesn't. But that actually went a very long way because in a parallel situation, some pilot said nothing, and then everyone on the plane's freaking out.
Yeah, I mean, this was a plane that had a hole in the plane, and all of a sudden they start descending, and so you think, oh my God, we're going down. People are starting by Wi-Fi. One of the engines exploded. Whatever. Yeah, and she realized this is a good example of leadership, right? Of she's both a pilot, right, and a protector, right, of the people, and she recognized the passengers could interpret the somewhat seeming rapid descent in a very scary way. And so she went on and so many of the passengers at first talked about that, like I don't know if they call this or I came up with this phrase, but an optimistic why. Like, why are we going down? Yeah. And they gave that. But here's the simplest version of just what I mean by like having a clear understanding. You imagine two people, they walk out of a meeting and one person thinks we're supposed to do the task as quickly as possible. And the other person thinks we're supposed to do the task with as highest quality. And then they start trying to coordinate. And the person here is like, why are you so slow? Like, I'm getting so frustrated. And the person over here is, why are you so sloppy? And so if we don't have, I talk a little bit about this in the book, but, Jimmy Carter just passed away. And, many people would consider his presidency, a failure. And the main reason why was he never communicated a clear vision to his cabinet secretaries. And, someone says, you think, okay, cabinet secretaries, they're leaders, but they even needed something to give an, operational meaning and understanding to what they needed to execute. And so I think, the first thing is we need to have, a very clear understanding. So there's sort of 5 components that I've studied that go into being visionary. And so the first one, right, is, seeing the big picture. And, and that requires taking a step back. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, we're both parents. And, I coined the phrase also the parent amplification effect, right? Things we do as a parent also have big influence on our kids. Sure. But when they're, sometimes when you're in a heated thing with your kid, to take a step back and just try to figure out what's really going on is really valuable. Like, as one example, my son Asher, he's 8. My mother-in-law's lived with us since he was born. And she just moved to Vegas December 24th, and she came back for the book party. So she was back last week on Saturday, and she left on Saturday. And Saturday afternoon, he just started being really mean to my wife and I, Jen and I. And, but if you take a step back, you're like, wait, his grandmother who lived with him for 8 years came back and then she left again. It's hurting him. And so being visionary also helps us regulate our emotions, I think is really important. A second component is optimism, right? That we need to have, Morning in America, Reagan, Sunrise Side of the Mountain, Bush, Hope, Obama, right? This idea that we're going to make America great again, right? All of these are about optimistic sort of big picture views of the future. But the other 2 elements that sort of really matter a lot, or 3 elements, are something that many people do poorly. And I think you would appreciate the political idea that I think Democrats do particularly poorly in the last, many decades is you got to make it simple. And so I call that the Inception rule from the movie Inception, where they're trying to plant an idea in someone's mind. And one of them, Cobb asked Eames, you tried this before, it didn't stick, you didn't go deep enough. He's like, it's not about depth, it's about the simplicity of the idea, so it grows in someone's mind. The second thing, and this is something, again, you can learn, is to make it more visual, right? And so one of the studies that I really like is this vision. Our mission is to make our customers happy or satisfied, right? Versus our mission is to make our customers smile. And now you can see that smile. And I always go back to Martin Luther King, we had Martin Luther King Day, he talks about sweltering in the heat of injustice, right? You can see that, lips vivid. Dripping. And we just don't do enough. So I have a paper that I'm working on right now. We analyzed every convention speech in the 20th century for Democrats and Republicans, and we can predict the winner based on the metaphorical language in the speech, controlling for inflation, GDP, and unemployment, controlling for incumbency, even controlling for Gallup polling the day before the first convention. And then the third thing, and this is where I think Democrats really fail, is repetition. Is to say it again and again and again.
By the way, as a CEO, that's one thing you do if you're, in my opinion, like, if you want something to happen, is you do have to hammer it home over and over again. And this is something you'd think like, I just should say it once and then we're fine, right? It's like, no, that like never is the case. It's like I would just hit the same things over and over again. And then it works.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that, part of the reason why, and I've worked with CEOs on this, right, as part of the reason why they think it's so clear in their own mind. Right, you're like, I got to say it once. You've thought about it so much. Where this is where you're going now, and so that's kind of the curse of knowledge, right? That we have this curse of knowledge where we know this thing is important, we can see it, and we have to communicate it. I was teaching to a group of 50 CEOs and presidents, part of the YPO Young Presidents Organization, and one of them had the great comment. He said, "I call it the throw up rule," and I was like, "What's the throw up rule?" He's like, "I've said the vision so many times that you're so sick of hearing it, you kind of throw up a little bit in your mouth." But it really helps people, have a level of clarity. Repetition, like everything, right, has good and bad effects. So, one of the things that I've done a lot of is I've been an expert witness in a number of like defamation trials, harmed reputation. And part of the reason why the repeating of negative information is so harmful because repetition is very powerful. There's something called the illusion of truth, right? The more times you hear something, the more likely you think it's true. And even Trump was like, he's like, about the election 2020, he said, if you say it enough times, if you say it strong enough, if you say it hard enough, people will start to believe it. Right. And so it doesn't matter if it's true. But reputation, all these things, can be used for good. So, to be visionary requires, satisfying that fundamental need for meaning and understanding. In doing so, we can do that by having a big picture, optimistic view of the future that we simplify and visualize, and then we repeat again and again and again.
Yeah, and it can be something pretty straightforward in your job. It could be like, we are going to grow our revenue, 20% this year, and then you do something a little more visual and interesting and and the rest of it. So it's not necessarily, we're not talking all about, presidential level sloganeering or whatnot. It's like anyone who has a goal, or we're going to have a great taco night every Tuesday over this month, and it's going to be tasty tacos. That there's, by the way, it's what's funny too is reading a book like this, and I've read leadership books, but now objectively, as former presidential candidate, I must obviously be a tremendous leader. But what's funny is that there are all these habits that you see that I certainly have adopted at various points that do bleed into my personal life. So that Taco Tuesday thing is totally something I would do.
Yeah, we actually we had tacos last night. We actually do Taco Tuesday in my house, so it's sort of funny that
Yeah, like I throw down the vision on just like the most arbitrary, mundane things. It makes me a lot of fun. This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. I have always been in search of the perfect mattress. Sleeping something you do 8 hours a day on a good day, and it's a third of your life. Plus, it can make you healthier, more energetic, more productive. I'm a little bit of a productivity fiend, honestly. And so I was so excited to finally find out about Helix mattresses, the best mattress in the biz. Don't just take my word for it. GQ wired my kids. I took the sleep quiz at helixsleep.com and got matched with a Dawn Firm mattress that has been a game changer for me. I wake up refreshed, ready to take on the day. I kind of need a firm mattress. It's not Evelyn's jam so much, but it is mine. And I got to say, it has been worth every penny. Every moment I'm on this mattress makes me actually feel like I made a good life decision. Helix Sleep can give you that feeling every single morning when you wake up. Don't take my word for it. Go to helixsleep.com/yang for 20% off site-wide plus 2 free dream pillows with mattress purchase. That's helixsleep.com/yang for 20% off site-wide plus 2 free dream pillows with mattress purchase. helixsleep.com/yang. being visionary, as you can tell, like is actually something that if you decided to, you could do more regularly for most people.
Yeah. And I think, people don't do it for a variety of reasons. Some of it is out of fear, right? It's like, seems scary to try to commit to one thing, right? And so they try to avoid that. They can't see the vision. But the thing that I found more times isn't that there isn't a big picture, optimistic vision of the future that's based in some core values that are really important, is that people just can't communicate it effectively.
I actually think it's oftentimes both.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things I want to, because I talk to young people, I actually just spoke at a college, this week. And people talk about your values and whatnot. And one thing I said to these young people too, it's like, honestly, I didn't know my values until I was older than you guys. It's like my values at your age were, get good grades and try and get a date and, beat the video game level I'm currently on. Like, it's like there wasn't much sophisticated moral philosophy going on. And so to some extent, I think identifying a thing that you want to put out in the world is number one. But I agree with you. Number two is that especially in today's day and age, like a lot of people are reluctant to communicate what it is that they want.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think part of it is not just, again, taking what you understand in your head and translating to what other people can understand in their head. And so that's really what communication is. And it requires this thing I've studied for 25 years since I was at Princeton, the psych department, perspective taking, right? And really being able to take the perspective. But I want to come back to values. And one of the most important things is to know your values. So one of the things that we require everyone at Columbia Business School to do the first week they're there is to spend at multiple different points in time thinking about their core values. We want them to pick their 5 core values and put them into a hierarchy where one is more important than others. And then we actually laminate a card for them that they can keep in their wallet. And I have my values card in my wallet myself. But there's so much research. I just want to tell you about one of my favorite studies that I worked on. So we did a study, it just came out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences about 1.5 years ago, but we worked with a Swiss employment agency. And we brought people in people came in to register to get unemployment benefits. And for half the people coming in over a period of time, we asked them to think about their values, the values hierarchy. But we also said, why are these values important to you? But also, how have you demonstrated those values in your life recently? And 2 months later, they were twice as likely to have found a job. And the effect was basically so pronounced that we ended the experiment and gave everybody the values, task. And, what is it about reflecting on your values? You mentioned you didn't know your values, until later, but I didn't do the study. Jeff Cohn of Stanford did. They went into an 8th grade classroom that had at-risk kids. It was an at-risk school, and they gave half of them this values, same kind of thing, 8 times over 2 years. So 4 times a year.
So just give an example of a value, because some people might be thinking like, oh, what are my 5 values?
Yeah, I'll tell you my 5 values. So my number one value at top is generosity. And so to me, it's about being generous financially, but it's also about being generous with spirit. And so giving people the benefit of the doubt, when they're having a bad day, for example. Number 2 is what I call positive energy. And so to me, that's, part of that is passion, but part of it's humor, and sort of having this thing. Number 3 is courage. So being able to stand up, not only for myself, but for others. 4th is creativity. And then, to always be thinking of creative solutions to problems. And then the final one, is my wife spent 2 years living in Japan. She loves the word kaizen, which is continued improvement. And the idea that we can always get better tomorrow.
Growth mindset.
Growth mindset. Yeah. And so those are my 5 values. And I think it's really valuable because to reflect on them periodically, because you might, for example, just be like, I'm so mad at this person.
Holy crap, man. Just the fact you could rattle them off. I mean, and those values are in your book. So, but like, it's clear that you've internalized them very, very deeply. And I'm going to suggest that that's true for virtually none of the people listening to this right now, where it's like, hey, what are the top 5 values? I mean, they could eventually come up with them. But to, just know them by heart the way you do is very powerful.
Well, I want to just add one point about this. So we've been inquiring this, for, 15, 20 years. And like, it wasn't until about 8 years ago that I actually did it myself. Like I even kind of resisted it, even though I was teaching it, because it feels kind of scary to think about your values and to pick some and then I did it and it was the best thing I ever did.
It is the most powerful thing. By the way, a couple of things that have helped me a great deal. It's like you write down your goals and your self-concept, which is in many ways the values.
Yeah.
Because then what happens is you get presented with a choice and then you're like, well, if I'm freaking serious about accomplishing that goal or being... So let's say, I ask you to do me a favor right now, and then you're like, I don't really feel like it. But it's like, but I literally think of myself as a generous person.
Yeah.
Number one. So it's like, so I guess I'd better do it or I'm kind of full of shit. And so that, like, I have the list of life's goals. And then when I was presented with a choice, then it's like, well, if I'm serious...
Yeah.
If I'm serious about improving the lives of millions of people before I leave this earth, then I should probably do something dramatic like run for president. And so in that case, like I did have that as a life goal, and I was like, I want to improve the lives of millions of people. And then if you say you're going to improve the lives of millions of people, and you don't actually pursue an opportunity to do so, then you're not actually being true to yourself. But you kind of need to like codify it and turn to it and look at it. And the same is true of values. Like if you hold yourself to, as a certain sort of human, and then, you're challenged essentially to be that human or not, then you're like, well, I guess I better be this person.
Absolutely. And I think, but you can also see how values come into play with any type of thing that you propose, right? So you propose something like, universal income, for example, right? And so for some people, that's an incredibly positive thing because it's about that each person has value and we want them to have the basic necessities. And then from that, they can grow and do things. And then other people are fearful of like that creates laziness and slothfulness. And so it goes a different way. But I just want to go back to that study at Stanford just really quickly. So they went to the 8th grade classroom and they gave them this values reflection 4 times a year over 2 years. 5 years later, they were more likely to graduate high school and more likely to go to college. So there's something even you might
very
say
powerful about it.
Yeah, there's something. And so I think there's 2 things that happen when you reflect on your values. It connects you to something larger than yourself. But it also, gives you this fuels with a little bit of optimism, which is one of the most important things, right? It's like optimism really is such an unbelievable driver of things. One study I did in negotiations, for example, we just asked people to think about, what they hope to accomplish in this negotiation versus what did they want to prevent from happening in the negotiation? And the people that focused on the more positive one got better outcomes, and so there's something really positive about, like you said, growth mindset, but in a very particular, like optimistic way of doing that. And so values, I think, become really, really important. I have an article coming out in Harvard Business Review in the next issue, and I tell a story of a CEO in 2009. So I was working for the company. I was doing workshops for him. I just happened to be doing a workshop on a day. This was April or May of 2009, during the financial crisis. And the person came on. It was, I can't remember. They had like 14,000 employees. So it was people all over the world that were on this call. And everyone was bracing for downsizing, for layoffs. And he got on and he said, I've been trying to figure out what to do, right? We're losing money. We got to figure out a plan to get back on track. But our number one value that we state is empowering employees. And laying off people isn't very empowering. And so he came up with the solution of...
I empower you to make your own way.
Yeah, exactly. But he did essentially temporary pay cuts for everyone. And it was progressive. So like low-level employees got like a 15% cut, like vice presidents 40%, and he took no money. And he said, this we're going to do for the next 3 months, And what I also love about this story is he said, I'm taking away something from you, but I'm going to give you something. Because we have less work in the summer, we're going to close all offices at noon on Friday. And so you can go for a picnic with your kids. You can go to the beach. You can do whatever you want. And then hopefully come, August, we can make a decision to take away those temporary pay cuts and have full, employment later on. And so that was, you mentioned caring about employees. The other thing he did in that thing is he talked about looking out for each other, which I thought was really nice. But he answered questions for like 90 minutes. And my favorite part of his answering questions is the number of questions that someone asked that had already been answered. Like you said, you got to repeat it again and again. And they're like, wait, is this permanent? Like, as I said 7 times, we're going to do this for 3 months and then we're going to reassess. And then, but he was so calm and understood, that when people are fearful, they can't hear, right? Fear doesn't hear. And that's another thing I think about vision is that when you're with a group of people and it's a tumultuous time, like you're going to have to repeat even more. Right, because people are not going to be able to hear. Yeah, they're not in
super listening mode.
Nope.
They're thinking about their own livelihoods and families and everything else. Have you made a New Year's resolution that's related to eating healthier, being a little bit more fit, losing a little bit of weight? Well, have I got great news for you. Factor meals can help you actually achieve that goal. Imagine fully prepared meals sent to you fresh. I'm good at a lot of things, I will confess, but I'm really crappy at cooking. And Factor makes it so that you can have a completely delicious, awesome meal in the comfort of your own home that's healthy, it's good for you. When you eat something and you know it's healthy, that's the experience with Factor. When I ordered it, the Nona's Bolognese, the mustard chicken, they hit the spot. They're quick, they're convenient, they get the job done, and then some. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Okay, so people listening to this right now are like, visionary, kind of get it. I can sort of see it. Yes, like I can imagine myself painting a clearer picture, repeating it, setting a clear goal, etc. Then the second element of inspiring leadership seems harder, which is exemplar, which is essentially like I summarized it as like be exemplary. And most people listening to this would think, I can imagine myself practicing laying out clear goals, communicating them, but like how can I practice being the best version of myself?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you look at some of the elements, right, what does it mean to be exemplary? So one that comes up a lot is like calm courage, right? Calmness and courage in a crisis, like protecting other people, but doing it, in an unfrazzled way. For me, my favorite memory of my life is my dad holding me in the ocean. And I really love that because I felt so safe in his arms, but I was also being adventurous, like with the waves coming over, I was like 3 or 4 years old. It was just like this incredible. So we want George Washington crossing the Delaware, right? That resolute figure, like, and it's almost like, what a statue is, essentially. But we can, a lot of ways we become calmer in situations by practicing ways to be calm. So meditation, right, is one thing. But we can also, we get calmer through experience. So like your first presidential debate, you're probably much more anxious than your fourth one. And so getting experience becomes, I think, another really way. But one of the things that research shows is that we learn from experience, but especially when we reflect on that experience. And so, you go through and like try to do it and learn from it. And that gives you the optimism for later. But I wonder if we could do a little activity that I do all around the world.
Well, sure, man. Sure. I like the sound of this.
So what I want you to do is I want you to tell me about something that you're passionate about. Just describe something that you're really passionate about. It could be something about your family. It could be a hobby. It could be about a current venture you're doing. But just tell me like something that just fills you with passion.
For years and years and years now, I have been passionate about putting people in position to succeed and flourish. Okay. When I see someone who is talented or high character or industrious, I want to put them in a role that pushes them and helps bring out the best in them.
Okay. Do you have an example of that where you've...
Yeah, I mean, so some of the best stuff I did was when I was running Manhattan Prep, we would hire people and then try and put them in positions to grow. And when the company was acquired, some of these people got down payments for a house and, like different things where but you saw them go from, in some cases, recent college graduate newbie to manager to director to like mature leader, really. And in my fondest dreams, though, I make a little bit too much of entrepreneurship and whatnot, like they would go off and start their own firms, and then they have this kind of circle of life effect.
Yeah. So I've done this exercise, with thousands and thousands of people around the world, and I'm interested in what people say, but I'm also interested in how they say it. So one of the things that we've done, some research I've done with Yanya Himowitz at Harvard Business School, is that, and you displayed many of these just now, like when someone starts talking about their passions, what I do in the classroom is I pair people up and then I say, okay, have one person talk about passion, the other person listens, they switch, and I say, what did you notice about the person? And they're like, their eyes got big. They sparkled. They lit up, right? They started to smile. They started to speak more quickly. So that's one thing you did. You started speaking more quickly. They started using their hands more. Your hand was going, up and down. And they oftentimes lean in, right? As if telling a secret. And so one of the things that's really like one of the core elements of being exemplary is being authentically passionate. But in this case, you really see how those connect because it's in your eyes, it's in your mouth, it's in your throat, it's in your hands, it's your body. Now imagine you didn't authentically feel that and you tried to fake it, right? You're like, okay, I got to make my eyes big. Okay, now I got to smile.
That's difficult.
And those 5 things happen spontaneously and simultaneously when they're authentic. So, it's one of the reasons why I think that, Donald Trump has been so successful. I mean, he has a very clear, simple, optimistic vision, make America great again. But he presents himself as a courageous protector. And even his biggest detractors would say that he comes across as authentically passionate about what he believes in.
He's authentic, all right.
I don't know if he actually believes in it.
Yeah, for sure.
But and so I think that's that's one example where we can tap into our passion and, discover our authenticity and how we do it. And I think, think about going on a presidential debate, right? Like you want to be the best version of yourself. And, one of the things that I discovered was when I started teaching is I started copying another teacher who was really good, and he would stand like this, and he would, he had rings on his fingers. People call him the Lord of the Rings, but he would, be very solemn. And I tried that, and I just felt like a fraud up there. And but it was only when I realized who I was. I like talking about research. I share personal stories.
He discovered the Galinsky method.
Yes, exactly. But everyone has to discover the method.
And by the way, Adam has won teaching awards and whatnot. People. But people love the Galinsky method.
Yes, but here's my favorite story about it is we had a new professor coming. He was an American, but he was a professor at University of Amsterdam, and he was in the psych department there. And he's coming to Northwestern, and his first time he's teaching in the U.S. to MBA students, in a business school. And I was made his mentor. And I said, okay, sit in my class for each of the sections in the morning. And there's 3 other faculty teaching the same class. I said, I want you to sit on one of theirs in the afternoon. So, Brian Utzi's great on social networks. Sit on his class. Vicky Medvick on decision making. Watch her teach that. Kathy Phillips on teams. And he said it was the best experience because if he just sat on my class, he would have copied what I did just innately. But he realized all 4 of us were completely different. And he realized that he needed to figure out what would work for him. And then he got a 9.7 out of 10 in the first time he taught. But if he just watched me, he would have copied the Galinsky method and it wouldn't have been as effective, right? So
the Galinsky method. Yeah. One of the things that's true of political figures, it's also true of creatives in many ways, teachers probably. But it's the closer to yourself you become, then the more compelling and potent and creative. What's funny is I think that there's this process of learning that we do, and then there's almost a process then of trying to discover or rediscover what's inside, and then if you can find it, then it can supercharge you. Yeah. Whether it's in front of students or if you're writing a song or anything like that.
I mean, there's an old study. I don't remember all the details, but it was trying to figure out what was the secret ingredient of a great closing statement, right, in the courtroom. And the conclusion I remember this person saying is there wasn't one because it just worked for you. Like some people were like Johnny Cochran and thunderous with like, rhymes.
You kind of each have your own jam. And a lot of professionalism is like if you find what it is that your jam is, like, you discovered it's like, hey, for me, it's research and anecdotes and, and the rest of it. And then for someone else, something. It's true. When I was running for office, like I kind of discovered what made me president today. No, what certainly what was way to rub it in. What was like the most natural and authentic to me. And I mean, I certainly grew a lot.
But, another element of being, I think an exemplar is also finding that right balance between, confidence and humility. And, I mentioned the mayor thing because the joke you did at Michael's.
I know. I mean, I got the joke. Actually, I was thinking to listeners, they might be like, oh, that seemed like a dig. But the reason was that I told a joke at an event that Adam and I were both at for, our mutual friend Michael Hepner's book launch, where I said, thanks to Michael, today I'm both president and mayor.
First person ever in America to be both. All thanks to Michael. But I think, again, we can... if you think about what does it mean to be exemplar, I think there's these 4 categories. So there's the calm and create courage. There's the authentic, passionate. There's the confident, but humble. And then there is, I think the one where we really hear the word exemplary is also this idea of being, consistent with our vision, right? So it goes back to a little bit to the vision. So
so you don't want to be the opposite.
The hypocrite, right? Yeah. I talked a little bit about infuriation before, but there's nothing more infuriating than a hypocrite, right? Someone who says this principle or this value and then violates it, or says you have to do X, but they do Y, right? And so that's sort of, and again, that's part of the leader amplification effect. If you're on stage and you're espousing certain principles but violating themselves, it's really apparent to everyone, and it becomes really difficult, to navigate. The one thing I really love is being creative, and I think that's another really part of how do we come up with creative solutions. And I tell a story in the book, which it's one of my favorite stories ever about my dad. In 1992, so a long time ago, you were probably just starting college.
Starting college.
Yep. My sister was getting married, and my dad was buying 22 plane tickets because Northwest had a half off fare, but it expired at midnight. And back then you had to call on the phone, but you weren't put on hold. It just was busy and you had to redial. And so he was like calling all night long. And then at one point he was holding the Northwest pamphlet and he saw at the very bottom, it said Spanish number for Spanish speakers, and so the person, called up and they were like, Buenos noches. And he was like, habla inglés. And the guy just like burst out laughing. He's like, no one has ever asked me that before, but yes, I speak English. And my dad's like, can you get tickets from an English speaker? And so, he got all these tickets in the nick of time. And so I think another thing is how do we see, think differently, right? How do we see creative solutions? Whatever you think about Trump, he's trying, he's presenting different ideas, right? Universal income is a different idea. How do we get people to think differently?
Yeah, he's certainly pushing the envelope. So now we have a sense of visionary and exemplar. And the third, I think people will feel most comfortable with, which is try and be a good mentor.
Yep. And, one thing I'll tell you is I'll give you a mnemonic device for how you might remember this. I call it the Venn diagram of inspiring leadership. So just like 3 overlapping circles with inspiring in the middle. So instead of VEN, it's VEM for visionary, exemplar, and mentor. But, mentor is sort of how we interact with others. And there's sort of 3 key, I would say, characteristics. The first is empowering people. When you ask people around the world about an infuriating leader, one thing that comes up in every country in the world is micromanager. Right? Someone who just doesn't trust you. They don't give you opportunity. They don't give you responsibility. And an inspiring leader, pushes you forward, right? By giving you opportunities, letting you sit on a meeting that's really important. The second one is elevating people, right? Not diminishing them. And one of the things, if you ask people in any organization about things that infuriated them, you don't even ask them about a leader, but just something that made their blood boil. It's someone stealing their idea. Someone taking credit for something that they worked on. And so the infuriating leader, right, steals credit and blames everybody else for everything. It's me, 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 me when things go well, and it's you when things go poorly. Whereas the inspiring leader shares success, right, and takes on that blame and burden. And so one of the things that I've studied, I just published a paper that I really love called The Vicious Cycle of Status Insecurity. And that when we're insecure about how our own standing, we think we get this zero-sum view of status in our mind. Like, if I give you credit, then I'm going to lose status.
Yeah. Someone else wins, then I must be losing.
Yeah. And so, but the thing is, we know from lots of research and research that I've done too, is that when we actually lift people up and highlight their contributions, they gain in status.
I'm very much like a growth, like grow the pie.
Yeah. Expand. Yeah. I call it expand the status pie. That's a phrase that I love.
Yeah, it's like abundance versus scarcity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so people, I mean, there's nothing greater than feeling, elevated.
It's the best. Agree.
I tell a story in the book. Jonah Rockoff, who's a faculty member at Columbia with me in the economics department, he was literally on the treadmill watching one of Obama's State of the Union speeches, and Obama mentions his research on the State of the Union, and he literally flies off the treadmill. And by the time he gets back up, his phone is just blowing up with text messages like, "I can't believe Obama mentioned your research," and it was about sort of the value of teachers and how much teachers matter in people's lives. And just look for it. So, if I was going to give a single piece of advice for anyone out there in the world,
yes.
I would say, and this is a president of a company, every single morning over a cup of coffee, he reaches out to one of his, 14,000 employees and basically, compliments them in some way, or express gratitude to them, wishes them a happy birthday, reaches out to them. And one of the interesting things is, we often say to people, oh, do things face to face. Face to face is always better. But complimenting someone face to face is actually a little awkward because they're like, a little bit. You're like, ah. But if you do it over like text or email, they get to savor it. Right. They get to forward it to their mom, right. Or their spouse. But he sort of pointed out, he's like, the thing is like, I send those to put a skip in their step. But if I'd said that in person, they would kind of like brush it off, But when I send an email, then I get these gushing emails back. And then that puts a skip in my step. And so this very simple thing of this daily pattern of just elevating someone.
Good practice.
Is really, and he says, because he does it over his coffee, he does it, it's ritualized, it's habitualized. And then the final element, so we have empower people, elevate people. And there's this about empowerment. There's a great quote from Confucius, and it's like, tell me and I will forget. Show me and I may remember, but it's only when you involve me that I truly understand. And, we have so many of these experiences where, I call it the travel book, syndrome, where like I read a travel book before I go somewhere, and then I don't remember anything that I read. Yeah. And then I look at it afterwards and it all makes sense to me, and so being involved in something. And then the third one is what I call empathy, right? Is really empathizing with people's
3 E's, like these mnemonics.
Yes. So each one of those, they have a reflection task that are helpful. So how do you get into a visionary state of mind? You can reflect on your values. But one of the things that I pioneered with a colleague at Stanford and NYU is we were trying to study power and like what are the psychological effects of power. But if I make you in an undergraduate experiment, you the boss and me the subordinate, you might act certain ways.
Is this Jeff Pfeffer by chance?
No, it's not Jeff Pfeffer. It's Deb Grunfeld. But
That's all good.
Jeff Pfeffer, I know, wrote a lot of famous books on power.
Yeah, totally.
Deb Grunfeld wrote her own book on acting with power, which is pretty amazing book. But we just asked people to recall a time when they felt powerful and in control. And then we showed, hundreds of studies around the world have used this. People in Europe showed...
They actually act more confidently, yeah.
They were confident, optimistic, right? But they can see the big picture. They can be more visionary, but also it calms them down. It helps them be more courageous. It can help them... it makes you feel super and then you sort of act super, right? And we've shown it helps in job interviews, for example. It's even more powerful than the power pose, right? Because you're authentically remembering your own experience and that's really helpful. And then to be a great mentor, it really requires this reflection task of thinking about the world from someone else's perspective, like, vantage point and how much that has a powerful impact. But the other thing that I've been studying is what's a general practice that you can do to be more inspiring more in the time? And I've, you brought up the 3 E's, so it made me think of this, which is, I've come up with an acronym that I call REAP. And the reason why I love that acronym, it's a playoff of, reap what you sow from the Bible, which is if you put inspiration out there, you get inspiration back. If you put infuriation out there, you get infuriation back. But in this case, REAP is an acronym. It's a homonym, so it's a different spelling, REIP. And the R stands for reflection. So once a month, reflect on when have I been inspiring? When have I been infuriating? How can I be more inspiring? The E is emulate. So think of who has inspired you recently in your own life and how can I emulate that behavior? And then you take those reflections and those emulations and you turn them into a single intention. So in the next month, I'm going to make sure I'm more optimistic in my vision, or I'm going to try to be more calm when things get stressful at work, or I'm going to elevate someone on a daily basis. And then you practice that over the next month and it becomes more habitual. So REIP, reflect on your experiences, emulate others, turn those into intentions, practice those, and then you're going to be more likely to be inspiring more of the time.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is, most of us didn't have much of a choice because ISPs operate a lot like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use this monopoly position to take advantage of customers, and yes, they even sell your data, your activities to advertisers and big tech companies, and you don't see a dime. That's why I protect my internet surfing and devices with ExpressVPN. When you use ExpressVPN, it's like a magic portal to a perfectly safe and anonymous internet. And don't take my word for it. This is the #1 VPN service according to CNET. It's used by major companies all over the world. So stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech companies who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with a VPN I trust to keep my privacy online. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's expressvpn.com/yang to get 3 extra months free. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now to learn more. One thing I enjoyed about your book is that you actually do use the mirror image, which is these infuriating people, leaders, which is fun because, we've all encountered them. And your research pointed out something that I thought was fascinating, which is there's this pattern around high power, low status figures. And people are like, how the heck can you have high power and low status? And the answer is maybe you occupy a spot in a bureaucracy. Like, has anyone ever been at, I hate to beat up the DMV because DMV people are fine, but like someone's in a position where they can either clear the path or make your life very, very onerous and difficult. But they're not like they're not a high status person in the sense that they're just like a cog in a bureaucratic wheel. Or right now I'm imagining someone who's approving some kind of zoning or business application where it's like, oh, if I don't get this, then I can't open my bar or restaurant. And, that certificate or is not exactly like a high status person, but they're very, very powerful for you in that moment. And one of the things that infuriates people is when they run into like a high power, low status figure that, you call them petty tyrants, I believe.
Yeah, little tyrants. And, I first got interested, my first, academic job was at Northwestern University. And there was, the person that was in charge of reimbursements for a department. And she literally was like the soup Nazi. Like if you didn't hand her the paper in the right way, she would get so mad at you. She had red tape at her cubicle, like do not cross this red line. And so you almost felt like the soup, on Seinfeld, there's this soup Nazi. If you don't ask for it the right way,
you need those reimbursement checks. Come on.
Especially as a younger
academic,
person.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And so, but so we can judge those people harshly, and we do. And Allison Fergale, who's written a wonderful book called Likeable Badass, she has also shown our great hatred of that. But what I showed in my research is that when someone is in this high power, low status position, it actually, because they have the power, they act on their resentment towards others. And so they make them do demeaning things. And so we actually did,
a study, which was wild.
Yeah. A fun study where we brought people in and we made them high status, we had all 4 combinations. So you're high power, high status, high power, low status, low power, high status, et cetera. And then they had an opportunity to make someone else do something, and we picked something that was like not very demeaning, like clap your hands a couple times, and then, but one of the demeaning ones that we pre-tested, the people said, that's really making someone do this demeaning is like, say I'm filthy 5 times, And so the people who are randomly assigned,
it's not even real. It's just random. Yeah. But like you are now low status, and
then they had power. They were more likely to ask people to do the demeaning things. Now, when I get demeaned, then I feel angry at you, and then it creates this vicious cycle of conflict. And so, but if I go back to this person at Kellogg, is she didn't have a lot of money, but she also had a kidney issue, so she couldn't really travel. But she loves snow globes, and so I discovered that if I brought back a snow globe from wherever I traveled, she felt so respected and valued. And, you said early on, make people think you care about them, right? And so when people are feeling insecure and, disrespected, sometimes we're like, we act mean to them in that way. But if we take their perspective and be like, what's it like? If we could show them some respect, then we get translated into a whole different category. I'll give you one example of this. When I started at Princeton in 1993, and there was 4 women who were the admin people in there, and just because of who I am, I went in and got to know them, and I found out, one of the women had a special needs child, and we would talk about that. Another one loved going gambling in Atlantic City, and I'd ask her questions. And then in my 4th year in graduate school, I noticed that every single doctoral student had an envelope in their box but me. And I asked them, what's the envelope for? They're like, it's the monthly bill. I was like, monthly bill for what? For mail, for copies. They had never charged me in my entire 5 years at Princeton, for anything that I had done. And I didn't even know we got charged for it, because I'd shown them respect, and I didn't do it for that reason, but people like doing nice things for people too.
Well, look at that. You can have them use their power for good to help you and not just, to demean you. Well, if I had to summarize the book in a way, and I hope you don't mind this, Adam, it's like, be a good person was my takeaway. And so this does apply much more broadly than what you'd think of as, leadership in, let's say, a corporate setting, because there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of human campfire type stories, lessons, and wisdom in your book. Congratulations. I'm sure it's touching a lot of lives and doing great. If someone wants to keep up with you, your work, your teachings, because you're clearly very, thoughtful and prolific, how can they best do so?
AdamGalinsky.com.
Look at this. He got AdamGalinsky.com. That's one of my prouder accomplishments was getting AndrewYang.com. Thank you, other Andrew Yang, who sold it to me. And Adam has AdamGalinsky.com. His book is Inspire, The Universal Path for Leading Yourself and Others. Congratulations again, Adam.
Much. This is so much fun talking. I really appreciate having me.
But your book's a real accomplishment, as is your research, as is your take on life. You've got a lovely family, a great body of knowledge that you've broken ground on. It's a lot to be proud of. I'll
just say one thing about the book. One of the comments I get given out of the book, which you could take as a criticism, is, and you said, to be a good person, is that it's very intuitive. And I think that's right. And I think the one thing that the book does is it takes this sort of lots of little bits of intuition we have about what it means to be a good person, but by giving sort of scientific rigor to that, then we can sort of hone in and realize, okay, these are the core elements. These are why these are the core elements.
And it makes it more achievable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So certainly I agree that, doing that is actually like an enormous feat. And some of the most important lessons, I think, can be boiled down to be very simple in their power.
Yeah, like a good vision.
Yeah, like a good vision. Look at that. He brought it full circle.